February 23, 1945, Mount Suribachi, Iwo Jima, Private First Class. Tadashi Yamamoto crouched in a concrete bunker, hands shaking as he scratched words that, if found, would have meant execution by his own officers. What he had seen through a narrow firing slit undermined every training axiom about the Americans. The Marines are not like other soldiers. They do not break. They do not die in the orderly way we were taught to expect. He had watched 6 Marines assault his position under murderous machine gun fire. 3 collapsed almost immediately, but the others closed. Relentless, when a grenade barrage struck one Marine, he absorbed the blast with his body to shield his squad and, grievously wounded, continued firing until he literally could not hold the weapon. Within minutes, the survivors had taken the emplacement. That single encounter distilled what Japanese soldiers across the Pacific had realized painfully. Battle after battle, American Marines combined a willingness to accept catastrophic casualties with industrial-scale firepower and a logistical system that replaced losses faster than Japan could possibly match. The collapse of Japanese confidence did not begin on Iwo Jima. It began at Guadalcanal on August 7, 1942, when Corporal Hideo Takahashi, already hardened by China, recorded in his diary that the Americans who had landed were unlike any enemy he had known. They did not retreat when surrounded. They would not surrender when their positions became hopeless, and they seemed to draw strength from fighting at night. Guadalcanal was supposed to be an easy defensive victory for the Imperial Army, which expected inexperienced Americans to crumble. Instead, Lieutenant Shigeru Fukudome's company, 200 men who had bested far larger Chinese forces, walked into prepared Marine positions on the night of August 20th and found themselves cut to pieces by counterattacking Marines who moved through jungle the Japanese believed impenetrable, killing silently and vanishing. By dawn, only 90 of Fukudome's men remained, while the Marines had suffered a dozen casualties. The pattern repeated. Japanese troops accustomed to enemies who collapsed under banzai charges discovered Marines who held until physically overrun and then fought hand-to-hand with bayonets, knives, and fists, while comrades immediately took a fallen gunner's place and kept firing. Intercepted letters and diaries. Sergeant Kenji, Matsumoto's among them, recorded the same bewilderment. The Americans were not the soft individualists their propaganda had described, but fighters molded by a brutal training system that broke recruits down and rebuilt them into something resembling what Japan called Bushido, but fused to an industrial nation's resources. By 1943, intelligence briefings to men like Private Yamamoto described captured Marines as having been through training that would be called criminal in many armies. 4 weeks of coming apart, followed by 4 weeks of being built into part of a collective organism where surrender was unthinkable, and every man's identity was bound to the unit. The psychological pressure of humiliation and enforced cohesion made Marines fight because to fail was to betray every Marine who had lived before. This psychological transformation, the captured reports said, resembled Japanese training but went further by creating an identity that demanded relentless assault, even when rational calculations suggested withdrawal. That combination, a warrior ethos comparable to Japan's Bushido married to America's overwhelming industrial capacity, proved devastating. Tarawa, in November 1943, made the point with brutal arithmetic. Rear Admiral Ki Shibasaki had 4,500 defenders in fortifications considered impregnable, and within 76 hours, the 2nd Marine Division had taken the atoll at a cost measured in waves of slaughtered attackers and yet persistent assault. Private Tadashi Ogawa, one of only 17 Japanese survivors, described successive waves dying in the water, on the beach, then finally engineers with flamethrowers reaching positions and not stopping until every defender was dead, or the attackers were. The casualty math was stark. American personnel losses were immense, but replacements, logistics, and firepower were inexhaustible compared with Japanese supply shortages, poor medical care, and an inability to rotate or resupply. Documents captured on Saipan in 1944 summed this fear neatly. Marines were labeled shock troops, who refused orders to retreat, counterattacked under disadvantageous conditions, and whose unit effectiveness did not degrade until they were destroyed. The Japanese learned that casualty rates Americans accepted would have paralyzed other armies. The operational speed of Marines compounded the problem. Junior leaders exercised initiative at the squad level in ways Japanese doctrine reserved for company commanders, enabling rapid exploitation of fleeting opportunities. Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa's plans for Peleliu assumed enemy rational pauses after landings. Marines never paused, taking half an airfield by nightfall after landing at 0830. Marines understood acceptable casualties as a tactical tool, a harsh calculus that horrified Japanese commanders who historically had valued soldiers' lives within operational limits. Sergeant Matsumoto recounted a platoon assaulting an apparently impregnable hill. In 30 seconds, 7 men fell. Survivors cleared the first bunker with grenades. 3 more fell on the second, and the last 5 men overran the third. From order to capture took 4 minutes. That was not reckless heroism, but systematic application of losses to gain objectives faster than defenders could react. The psychological effect on Japanese commanders was profound. Defending against Marines became a choice among losing options. Spread forces thin and yield vital ground. Bunch them and lose elsewhere, or hold and die. Because America could produce endless replacements and sustain operations through massive logistics. Second Lieutenant Toshio Yamamoto's nighttime patrol on Saipan, 3 days after the landings, found Marines eating hot food, receiving ammunition by truck with medical tents and rotations. They were fighting the fiercest battle in the Pacific, yet lived better than garrison troops, which proved the point. The longer a battle lasted, the weaker Japanese defenders became while the Americans grew stronger. By mid-1944, Japanese intelligence accepted the truth. Marines could not be stopped, only delayed. Captured documents instructed garrison commanders to prepare for delay operations, stock positions, build redundancies, plan staged withdrawals, accept likely death, and buy time for the empire. An admission of strategic fatalism rather than hope. Elite Marine raiders had pioneered tactics that instilled fear disproportionate to their numbers. Rapid night penetrations, small unit aggression, and mastery of darkness unsettled commanders like Colonel Kono Ichiki, who lost 700 men to 35 Marine casualties in a 20-minute disaster at Guadalcanal's Tanaru River in August 1942. Raiders were eventually integrated into regular divisions, spreading their techniques. Continuous night patrols, infiltration, decentralized decision-making, so that Marine forces pressed defenders around the clock. Day assaults backed by overwhelming artillery, tanks, and air power, night operations that denied defenders the traditional chance to rest and regroup. Corporal Takahashi summarized it. There was no rest, no safe time. The Marines fought continuously, combining industrial-scale firepower with small unit ferocity. The Marine method was methodical. Identify a bunker, call in artillery to pound it, bring flamethrower tanks, land demolition teams, and if resistance persisted, call naval gunfire that could literally erase hills. When combined arms failed, infantry still finished the position. Second Lieutenant Saburo Endo's diary from Saipan recorded naval bombardments that lasted hours before landings, aircraft strikes, tanks advancing with infantry, and artillery calling down direct fire to destroy defended terrain. Industrial destruction applied with surgical coordination. That combination, training, equipment, coordination, and logistics, outmatched the Japanese reliance on spirit and tactical skill absent comparable material support. In consequence, the Japanese military's defensive doctrine shifted from confident aggression to desperate attrition. Banzai charges, once valorized, were banned by commanders like Kuribayashi, who instead prepared defense in depth on Iwo Jima with tunnels, interconnected caves, registered fields of fire, and artillery pre-registered on beaches, all designed to bleed the invader. His mission was not to stop the Marines, he knew that impossible, but to exact such a cost that perhaps the Americans would reconsider invading the home islands. The Marines countered these plans by doing exactly what their prisoners and captives had feared. They would accept catastrophic losses and keep coming. On February 19, 1945, 70,000 Marines landed on Iwo Jima and met Kuribayashi's prepared hell. Naval bombardment that barely scratched fortifications, beaches strewn with dead and wounded, artillery observers calling down with terrifying accuracy. And yet the Marines, in neat formations that initially suffered appalling casualties, found gaps, exploited them, sent demolition teams crawling under fire. And when engineers died, others replaced them. Attack after attack, hour after hour, until positions fell. Private Yamamoto in his bunker watched a flamethrower team stagger forward. One operator killed. An assistant picked up the weapon and continued. He too was killed. A third took it and kept going. When the weapon was emptied, he hurled grenades into the firing ports until he was slain. But by then, demolition crews had reached the entrance and the bunker was lost. This scene repeated across the island thousands of times. The brutal arithmetic on Iwo Jima was hideous. All but a handful of the 21,000 defenders perished. Marine casualties numbered roughly 26,000 of 70,000 committed. Nearly 40%, including thousands killed. Yet the Marines never stopped. Kuribayashi himself, who survived until late March, sent a final message smuggled to Tokyo in which he paid the highest compliment he could. The Marines are the most effective soldiers I have faced. Their training makes them accept casualties that would break other units. Their firepower overwhelms ours by multiples. Their junior leaders act decisively at low levels, and above all, they never stop attacking. That refusal to yield, the willingness to pay any price, was the feature that terrified Japanese defenders more than any other. Battles like Saipan's final banzai on October 24–25, 1944, where roughly 3,000 Japanese charged and were cut down to the last man while Marines counterattacked with artillery at point-blank range, bayonets and trench knives, illustrated that mythic notions of American cowardice in close combat were false. Marines fought hand-to-hand and held. Private Tishi Yoshida's interrogation captured Japanese amazement and disillusionment. We were taught Americans were cowards who avoided close fighting. They met our charge and slaughtered us in close combat. The cumulative effect of these experiences was a shattering of propaganda and a grim practicality. Whatever the defenders' courage or doctrinal excellence, they could not match the combination of Marine ethos and American material superiority. Medical care was another decisive difference. Wounded Marines were evacuated, treated with plasma and antibiotics, and returned to the line or to replacement pools. Japanese wounded often died from infection or lack of adequate care. Captured soldiers watched Americans survive wounds that would have killed Japanese comrades and then fight again. That survivability undercut the idea that Japan could win by making invasions so costly that America would halt. Private Tadashi Gawa from Tarawa later said that after days of fighting and watching Marines continue to come again and again, despite horrific losses, he and his comrades understood the war was lost. An enemy who would pay any price to win cannot be defeated by making victory expensive. Prisoner reports, post-war interviews, and captured documents converged on the same analysis. Marines combined warrior spirit with industrial resources, trained recruits into a cohesive collective that would not surrender, leveraged overwhelming firepower and logistics, delegated authority to junior leaders to move faster than Japanese command structures, and coordinated combined arms effects with a speed and ruthlessness that left defenders no room to recover. The tactical guidance passed to garrison commanders: do not expect to hold, stock positions, prepare fallback lines, accept death as honor, was a strategy for delay, not victory. It underscored a strategic reality. Japan could not defend every island indefinitely, and American replacement rates and resupply meant attrition favored the invader. After the war, many Japanese veterans who had believed their own propaganda came to the same conclusion expressed in Private Yamamoto's final diary entry, written hours before he died. The Marines would win not because they were braver than we were, but because their nation gave them everything they needed to win, and they used those resources without mercy until we were all dead. That realization, that spirit without industrial support was insufficient, devastated survivors' faith in their leadership. The Marines paid a terrible price. Across the Pacific, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, they suffered some 86,000 casualties with nearly 9,500 killed. But they never failed to take objectives, never abandoned captured ground, and never provided Japan with reason to believe they could be defeated through superior bravery alone. The Japanese post-war assessments were unanimous. The Marines were the ultimate expression of American military power. Training equal to Japan's warrior tradition fused to industrial might. And, against that combination, the outcome had been decided long before many battles began. Only the duration and the cost remained variable. The record, the battles, the captured diaries and interrogation reports, and the survivors' testimonies tells why Japanese soldiers feared the Marines more than any other foe. They discovered that the Americans would not stop, would accept casualties that would have shattered other forces, and could be resupplied, reinforced, and medically sustained in ways Japan could not match. In the end, as Kuribayashi wrote in a final message, Japan could not defeat such an enemy. It could only hope its sacrifices bought time. That hope died with the war, but the bitter lesson endured. Spirit without material is not enough. And the Marines, forged by brutal training and supported by a nation's resources, proved that on every island they took,